Welcome back, APUSH students. Today is chapter 41, the final chapter of the American Pageant, titled The American People Face a New Country. If you don't know the American Pageant, it's fine because the content is still going to be the same. I'm going to be going over all the key terms and notes for this chapter that helped me get a 5, so I encourage you to take notes along as well. Before we get into this, I know this chapter is super late. The AP test for APUSH is in about 2 days. So I don't think anyone's going to be using this for any type of school assignments or anything like that. People are, obviously, you guys have got to all be in test mode right now. But honestly, I completely forgot about this chapter, that I hadn't done it yet, because honestly, this chapter doesn't really show up at all on the test. None of what's in this chapter is really going to be on the test at all. You don't need to know it at all. You might have had to know it for a test that you had in your class, but none of it's going to be on the test. But in order to retain my dignity, in order to be able to say that I uploaded every single chapter onto this channel and gave you guys access to every single chapter review, I will record this video right now and upload it as soon as possible. So yeah, let's get into it. George W. Bush, Republican president and son of George H.W. Bush. He was a conservative president that often took actions that offended many liberals. His policies caused much division that foreshadowed the rest of the century. 9/11, terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. Everyone should know what this is. It caused many deaths and much carnage, creating a shockwave that swept the nation. It exposed the lacking amount of national security and forced Bush to focus on attacking Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda, terrorist group responsible for 9/11. It was an Islamic terrorist group centering in Afghanistan, led by the infamous Osama bin Laden. It used anti-Western fear-mongering and radical Islamic rhetoric to round up a terrorist base that threatened the world. USA Patriot Act. This is pretty controversial. This might be the only thing you'll ever see on the APUSH exam relating to this unit. Expanded intelligence and surveillance. It was an intense reactionary response to 9/11, which greatly expanded agencies like the FBI and the CIA. It caused backlash from liberals who felt it would violate privacy and civil rights through intense law enforcement. This also had an impact on the conservative libertarian side, where libertarians felt that this act intruded too much in people's personal lives. So this is kind of a way that libertarians on the right and liberals on the left kind of agreed with each other. Department of Homeland Security, Congressional Cabinet to counteract terrorist threats. It was yet another bureaucracy focused on national security that helped to identify and counter terrorist threats. It also brought more attention to the border and immigration problem. Guantanamo detention camp, prisons for Taliban members and suspected terrorists. I think a lot of people might have heard of this already. It was highly controversial because some felt that terrorists did not deserve rights, but others felt that it set a dangerous precedent for violating civil rights of criminals. Conditions were often bad and principles of the justice system were not applied. Guantanamo became kind of synonymous as a metaphor for torture, and where people would be sent for bad conditions. People would go, oh, you're gonna go to Guantanamo or something like that. National security strategy outlined by Bush after 9/11. It was bold and controversial, calling on the country to identify Iraq, Iran, and North Korea as evil and enemies of the free world. It was heavily interventionist, justifying war and sometimes undermining international law. Iraq War, U.S. invasion of Iraq. The U.S. was flying solo and aggressive and in controversial status, where they destroyed Saddam Hussein's regime quickly and easily. At first, it was a major triumph for America, and Hussein was arrested and eventually killed. The liberating forces were received badly by the people, and they were forced to give power to an interim government, which was unstable due to ethnic tensions. Saddam Hussein, dictator of Iraq. He was the mastermind of the oppressive Iraqi regime that funded terrorists and developed weapons to threaten the free world. He was eventually captured and executed when his regime fell. No Child Left Behind, sanctioned schools not meeting students' needs. It was an important act that George W. Bush ran on. It was supposed to target the lowering expectations and performance at school that many claimed to be failing children instead of helping them. This act was a little bit controversial in that it didn't totally work because it created this weird cycle effect that it would pull funding from schools that weren't meeting requirements, but oftentimes schools weren't meeting requirements because they didn't have enough funding, so it kind of left bad schools just down in the gutter and didn't help as many schools as it might have been trying to. Immigration reform efforts to crack down on illegal immigration. There are many efforts to compromise in Washington, but the loud nativist and liberal groups opposed compromise from both sides. Immigration became a center for displaying the division in America. This is especially relevant today. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. She was the first woman to become Speaker of the House and was the face of the new Democratic majority in the House in 2006. Barack Obama, Democratic president. He became the first black president in United States history. He was young and fit for the times and also advocated for bipartisan politics. He was an expert campaigner and used various to galvanize his base and eventually won the presidency. This image of bipartisanship and youthfulness and things like that kind of fell apart towards the back end of the second term, but it was definitely really relevant for those first 4 years and just getting elected in the first place. Hyperpower, nation dominant in all categories of power, the United States would be one of them. America was at the forefront of the political, economic, and social world, which was steamrolling the rest of the world. Many felt it was dangerous for a country to have a monopoly on Earth. This monopoly, it's not really like a business sense, but in sort of political, military, and economic sense, just America was dominating the world. 2008 recession, bad economic recession. It was started by a mortgage crisis where banks had to foreclose on homes and would have to sell them at major losses in the now declined real estate market. It led to much government intervention to try and fix the most intense economic downturn since the Depression. You don't need to understand the ins and outs of the recession and how it happened. It's extremely interesting, honestly, if you want to go learn about it, but just know that the economy crashed and the government had to step in to fix the banking system. American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, stimulus bill for people and businesses. They contained heavy tax cuts, more government spending, infrastructure, jobs, and forms of relief for smaller levels of government, all to help combat the recession. The government bailed out many major companies to save jobs, but the government racked up debt as it did so. Unfortunately, the recession remained steadfast for years. Obamacare, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It created what was essentially a healthcare tax requiring all Americans to purchase health insurance. Also, states would purchase plans to give to people and small businesses at low cost, prohibited insurers from denying coverage, and raised the age in which children could stay covered. It was an enormous cost for the government, and it remains controversial today. The reason why it remains controversial is because even though Obamacare expanded coverage for a lot of people and gave tons of people health insurance, the way that it worked, there's definitely evidence that it increased costs overall, so it's not sure whether Obamacare is actually worth it for everyone. Tea Party, conservative and anti-Obama movement. They were a loud and aggressive movement that demonstrated in public and over the internet. It galvanized the Republican base that created a more active right that won the midterms. Occupy Wall Street, protesters who camped on New York's Wall Street. It was an energetic protest that politicized the issue of the rising wealth gap. It pointed out that the top 1% was owning more and more wealth. It influenced Obama to declare that he would fight inequality and help to bring broader prosperity. Widening class gaps, economic inequality between rich and poor. The rich had grown richer while the middle and poor remained stagnated, which caused widespread outrage. These disparities influence equity rhetoric, as many other countries enjoy more even distributions. Largely, it was a product of the modern and globalized economy. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission allowed for greater spending from businesses to candidates. This ruling opened the door for big corporations, nonprofits, and other large advocacy groups to pour large sums of money into backing political candidates. It directly led to the most expensive campaign ever, the 2012 election. It also started the long-held money in politics debate that held many advantages and disadvantages. The big thing with this case is that money sort of acts as speech, so they don't want to deny people's free speech to donate and support elections and specific candidates, but money in politics is extremely powerful, and there's always that potential for corruption that the government wants to crack down on. Graying of America, Americans getting older on average. It meant that more people were reaching the retirement age, which provided significant challenges to the economic system, specifically Social Security and Medicare. The imbalance was hard to address because it would need a sharp increase in taxes, which people did not want. Also, political division made everything hard to solve. There's definitely a big Social Security crisis. There's all these models and math predictions that Social Security is going to run dry by certain years and all that, and that's a big issue that needs to be solved in the government now. Shelby County v. Holder made the state clearance part of the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional. It got rid of the requirements for states with a history of discrimination to seek government approval for voting laws. This only intensified the debate over voting practices and its connection to discrimination. Political gridlock, political stagnation between Republicans and Democrats. Deep disillusionment with the Democrat failures, along with hesitancy to back Republicans, even the playing field. This created an even match with sharp division, leading to a declining power in Congress and the precedent for a more aggressive executive branch. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I won't see you in the next chapter because that is the book in its entirety. And I'll catch you guys in another video. Goodbye.